The roar of engines echoed through the air, filling the racetrack with an electric energy that could be felt deep in your chest. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the asphalt, as a crowd gathered to witness the race of the year. A race that no one could have predicted would become a symbol of something much bigger than speed. On one side stood Mason, a seasoned rider with a reputation as sharp as his insults. Known for his flashy bike and even flashier personality, Mason wasn't just confident, he was cocky, with an attitude that bordered on outright hostility. What made him infamous, though, wasn't just his skill. It was the way he belittled others, especially riders he thought didn't belong in his world. Then there was Darius, quiet, composed, and fiercely determined. He was a biker who let his actions speak louder than words. Riding his custom-built bike, Darius didn't need validation or fanfare. What he sought was simple: respect on the track. But for Mason, respect was the last thing he was willing to give Darius. Their paths crossed in a way that was impossible to ignore when Mason's comments escalated from dismissive to outright degrading. He didn't hold back, mocking Darius's bike, his skills, and with a thinly veiled sneer, his very presence in the sport. For Mason, it wasn't just about proving he was faster. It was about proving he was better. The tension crackled like a live wire as the two riders prepared to face off. Word of their rivalry spread like wildfire, drawing a crowd that wanted to see if Mason's arrogance would finally meet its match. The track was alive with anticipation, the hum of engines building as fans placed their bets and picked their sides. Darius stood by his bike, checking every detail with meticulous care. He wasn't just preparing for a race, he was preparing to send a message. His bike, sleek and powerful, was a reflection of his dedication, built with his own hands and designed for moments just like this. Mason, on the other hand, reveled in the attention, revving his engine to draw cheers from his supporters. His bike gleamed under the setting sun, a machine of undeniable power and speed, but his attitude left a bitter taste in the air. "This'll be over before it even starts," Mason taunted, his voice dripping with disdain. "You might as well save yourself the embarrassment." Darius didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any comeback, and it only fueled Mason's smugness. The starting line was a battleground, the two riders side by side, but worlds apart. The crowd's noise faded into the background as the countdown began, each second stretching out like an eternity. This wasn't just a race. It was a collision of values, of pride and perseverance, and everyone watching could feel it. The moment the flag dropped, engines roared to life, and the two bikes shot forward like lightning. Mason's aggression was evident from the start, pushing his bike to its limits, determined to leave Darius in his dust. But Darius wasn't just riding to win. He was riding to prove a point, his movements precise and calculated. As the race unfolded, it became clear this was no ordinary competition. Every twist and turn of the track mirrored the conflict between the riders, a battle not just of speed, but of determination and heart. Darius's bike, though less flashy, handled the course with a grace that seemed almost effortless, while Mason's brute force approach began to show cracks under the pressure. The gap between them fluctuated with every second, keeping the crowd on the edge of their seats. But it wasn't just about the track. This was about confronting prejudice and proving that skill, heart, and perseverance could shatter the barriers built by arrogance and hate. Each time Mason looked over his shoulder to see Darius gaining on him, his smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of doubt. The race was far from over, and with every passing moment, the outcome became less certain. And then, just when it seemed Mason might pull ahead for good, a sharp curve loomed in the distance, a curve that would test their skills and their nerves to the absolute limit. The crowd held its breath as the riders approached at breakneck speed, the tension so thick it felt like time itself had slowed down. The world seemed to blur as they leaned into the turn, the roar of their engines the only sound cutting through the silence. What happened next would change everything. The tires screeched as both riders leaned hard into the sharp curve, their bikes just inches from the pavement. It was a moment where skill mattered more than sheer speed, where control could mean the difference between victory and disaster. Mason gritted his teeth, gripping his handlebars with white-knuckled intensity. He had always relied on his bike's raw power to dominate races, but Darius was different. He rode with precision, reading the road like an open book, anticipating every twist, and turn with effortless confidence. For a split second, Mason glanced sideways, expecting to see Darius struggling to keep up. But instead, he saw something that sent a flash of frustration through him. Darius was right there, his expression calm, his movements fluid, as if the race was just another ride for him. Mason's jaw tightened. He refused to let this happen. Not to him. Not against someone like Darius. The crowd roared in the distance, their voices a blur against the deafening roar of the engines. Spectators knew this was more than just a competition. It was a battle of pride, a test of resilience. And the way Darius handled his bike, so smooth, so unshaken, it was clear he wasn't just racing to win. He was racing to prove a point, to silence every doubter, every insult, every sneer Mason had thrown his way. But Mason wasn't ready to accept that. He pushed his bike harder, determined to pull ahead. The next stretch of track was a straightaway, a perfect chance to leave Darius behind once and for all. Mason twisted the throttle, feeling the surge of power as his bike shot forward like a missile. He smirked. This was it. This was where he proved that no matter how well Darius could handle corners, pure speed was what truly mattered. But Darius didn't flinch. Instead of panicking, instead of making a desperate move, he stayed focused. He knew Mason's style: reckless, aggressive, impatient. He had studied riders like him before. Darius had spent years refining his technique, learning the balance between speed and control. He wasn't just riding for himself. He was riding for every underdog who had ever been told they weren't good enough, every racer who had been underestimated because of who they were. As Mason kept pushing forward, something started to shift. His bike, powerful but heavy, struggled to maintain stability at such extreme speeds. His tires wobbled slightly against the asphalt. His overconfidence had led him to overlook something critical: the upcoming chicane, a series of tight turns designed to challenge even the most skilled riders. Mason realized his mistake a second too late. Darius, on the other hand, had already prepared for it. He had studied this track inside and out, memorized its every curve, every potential hazard. While Mason was focused on brute force, Darius had mastered the art of reading the road. As the chicane approached, Darius executed a flawless maneuver, gliding through the turns with ease, while Mason fought desperately to regain control. The gap between them shifted. The lead Mason had fought so hard to gain was slipping through his fingers like sand. Panic flickered in his eyes. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had been so sure of his victory, so convinced that his opponent didn't stand a chance. And yet, here he was, watching Darius move ahead with a confidence that shook him to his core. For the first time, Mason felt something unfamiliar creeping in: doubt. He had spent so much time looking down on Darius, never believing he could be a real threat. But now, with the finish line drawing closer and Darius taking the lead, Mason realized something that sent a chill through him. He had underestimated him. Badly. The crowd's energy was electric, their cheers growing louder as the final stretch of the race came into view. Everyone could see it now. this wasn't just about winning. This was about proving something deeper, about breaking expectations, about defying every limit set by those who refused to see beyond their own biases. Darius felt the wind against his face, his grip steady, his heart pounding. He had come too far to lose now. Mason, meanwhile, was desperate, pushing his bike to the edge, searching for any possible way to close the gap. But as the finish line loomed ahead, one thing was becoming painfully clear. Darius wasn't just keeping up. He was winning, and Mason was running out of time. Mason clenched his teeth, his mind racing faster than his bike. He could see the finish line in the distance, but the reality was sinking in. Darius was ahead. Not by much, but enough to make Mason realize he was in real danger of losing. His heart pounded as he pushed his bike to the absolute limit, the engine screaming under the pressure. He had never been in this position before, never faced the possibility that someone he had ridden off could actually beat him. Darius, on the other hand, was locked in, focused on nothing but the road ahead. His hands were steady, his breathing controlled. Every ounce of his training, his experience, his instincts had led to this moment. He could hear Mason's bike roaring behind him, feel the tension in the air as the crowd erupted in cheers. But he didn't let it distract him. He wasn't racing against Mason anymore. He was racing for every time he had been doubted, every time he had been looked down on, every time someone had tried to tell him he didn't belong. Mason wasn't giving up. He had come too far, talked too much to let this slip away now. He forced his bike forward, inching closer, determined to take back the lead. But in his desperation, his grip tightened too hard, his control wavering. He was riding with frustration, not precision. And then it happened. Just as Mason tried to make his final move, his back tire wobbled, just slightly, but enough to throw off his balance. The high speed, the reckless push, the desperation all caught up to him in that 1 second. His bike skidded. Not enough to crash, but enough to cost him everything. Darius saw it happen out of the corner of his eye, but he didn't hesitate. He didn't slow down. He didn't look back. He just kept going, smooth, steady, unstoppable. And in the next heartbeat, he was there. The finish line. The moment Darius crossed it, the crowd erupted in a wave of cheers. Some were shocked. Some were thrilled. But everyone knew they had just witnessed something unforgettable. Mason rolled in a second later, his bike slowing to a stop, his face a mix of disbelief and frustration. He had lost. Darius took off his helmet, breathing heavily, but there was no smugness in his expression. Just quiet satisfaction. He had let his skills do the talking, and in the end, that had been enough. He didn't need to gloat. He didn't need to rub it in. The result spoke for itself. Mason, still straddling his bike, ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. His eyes flickered to Darius, and for a moment, it looked like he might say something. An insult, an excuse, something to brush off what had just happened. But then he stopped. Maybe it was the weight of the loss. Maybe it was the realization that all his words, all his arrogance, had led to nothing. Darius simply met his gaze, nodding once before turning to walk away. The race was over. The point had been made. And Mason knew it. As the crowd swarmed around Darius, celebrating his victory, Mason sat there for a few more seconds, staring at the track. Then, with a frustrated shake of his head, he revved his engine and rode off, disappearing into the distance. The message was clear. Skill, heart, and determination would always outweigh arrogance. Darius didn't just win the race. He had changed the game. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the track, one thing was certain. This was a race no one would ever forget.